This is John Lennon, part two of this particular broadcast, coming from the Windmill Ministries Missions at 291 Thompson Road, Sharon, Tennessee, zip code 38255.
But he was a high-profile figure, and so his activities were being monitored.
They knew for a fact that they didn't want hundreds, thousands, millions of young people attending a counter convention, especially where John Lennon would perform.
I don't think he realized the strength of the American political establishment and how much power it could exert onto him with regard to silencing him, or covert ways in which they might follow his activities.
We were sure that the phones were all tapped, and it was like most things, our wildest dreams did not begin to touch what they were actually doing against us.
You keep in mind, in that era, in that time, cellular telephones did not exist, the internet did not exist, social media did not exist, and it was basically reel to reel, one-on-one, in the developmental stages of a group of people who had these wild ideals that was basically going to set the planet Earth on fire. And believe it or not, looking at it in the year 2019 in comparison to what was going on in 1970, they done just exactly that. They set the world on fire.
Do you think that they are kind of picking on you, John?
Oh yeah, they picked on me. I'm telling you, when it first started, I was followed in a car, and my phone was tapped, and I think they wanted me to know to scare me, and I was scared, paranoid. And people thought I was crazy then, you know. I mean, they do anyway, but I mean, more so, you know, Lennon, oh, you big-headed little maniac, right? Who's going to follow you around? Well, what do they want? You know, that's what I'm saying. What do they want? You know, I'm not going to cause them any problem.
It surprised me when I heard that Lennon had been under surveillance, that he'd been wiretapped, just as it did when I heard that Martin Luther King had been. These sort of things that came out of the FBI really caught me as being so unnecessary and so risky, and why?
I can't prove it, you know. I just know there's a lot of repairs going on in the cellar. I know the difference between the phone being normal when I pick it up and when every time I pick it up there's a lot of noises, you know. And I don't.
Now we can look back and understand the reasoning in behind such schizophrenic, paranormal, paranoid behavior, because society was trying to prevent of where we are today back then. But what brings tears to my eyes is the fact that I have been preaching a message of love and peace and grace strictly directly out of the King James Version Bible for 30 plus years. And rather than people taking my message serious and believing in the ideology that I was teaching, they treated me as an idiot. They discarded my message. Not only did they discard my message, but then they started attacking me towards trying to provoke me. That way they could even turn that around and say, you see there, we told you that he was this way, we told you that he was that way, you see there. This is the infiltration that I personally have withstood, especially for the past 4 years since I have come back to Northwest Tennessee, which has been one of the most heartbreaking events that I think that I could have ever had to encounter. By now, in 2014, they had thoroughly become perverted to the point that now they're saying that black is white and white is black. Now they're saying that good is bad and bad is good. And it was an uprising right here in the community towards them trying to exile me and get rid of me. And it wasn't just working through the people, but it was working through the judicial system, through law and order that we call law and order of today, pertaining to our courts and our judges and our attorneys and our statesmen and our politicians. It's really bad when you have people such as myself, and yes, even Donald Trump, even though he has a lot of extreme ideals, his intent, we believe, was for the betterment and for the good of not just the American people, but of the world. Let's listen to some more of this and come to our own conclusions, please.
Open the door and there'd be guys standing on the other side of the street. I'd get in a car and they'd be following me. In a car. I'm not hiding, you see. That's why I got a bit paranoid as well. They wanted me to see I was being followed, you know. Suddenly I realized this was serious, you know. They were coming for me one way or the other, you know. I mean, they were harassing me.
I remember John said to me at one point, if anything happens to Yoko and me, it was not an accident.
When we found out that they were specifically interested in stopping our plans, that's when we realized that it wasn't just the usual surveillance, but that they were going to take aggressive steps against us.
Well, this story begins,
Aggressive.
at least from the White House perspective, with a letter that Senator Strom Thurmond wrote.
The Congress is long overdue in investigating the radical left for the purpose of devising new legislation to protect the security of our nation from enemy subversive efforts.
He was a major figure on the right as the right became much more of a dominant force in our politics in this country in the 70s.
Strom Thurmond was a Republican senator on the Senate Internal Security Subcommittee, and he had been given the information about the plans that Lennon was making with Jerry Rubin, Abby Hoffman, and other people for this national concert tour. This is what Strom Thurmond wrote the White House about. And this is where Strom Thurmond came up with a proposal to stop this. Strom Thurmond's memo to the White House ends, if Lennon's visa were terminated, it would be a strategic countermeasure.
One day, somebody knocked at the door, and we didn't open the door. We said, who is it? Who is it? Immigration. And the person just slipped the paper underneath the door. Because we didn't open the door, maybe that's why. And we looked at it, and it was a notice, a deportation notice. And we just looked at each other. What are we going to do? And it was a very frightening moment.
John, what did you say? You said you felt it was shocking?
Well, yeah, we're a bit shocked, you know.
Do you think that you will be deported?
I've no idea. Maybe it's just a process. I don't know. We better go in, we're late, you know. We'll see you when we come out if you want.
We talk to you when you come out? We have a number of matters we have to take care of.
The Immigration and Naturalization Service was planning to stage a huge show trial and basically get John Lennon in a very, very public way. They were going to try and show that he was an undesirable alien because of his lifestyle, because of his friends, and because of his politics. And then they were going to take some of the lyrics from some of his songs and play them. And a lot of his songs were very antagonistic to the Nixon administration.
What are your proceedings make you feel just on a purely emotional level?
Well, I feel like I'm back in school again, you know. I've been in trouble all my life, one way or the other, and I'm back to see the head, you know, and this time they don't cane me, that's all. They don't beat me anymore.
Well, there are two reasons the trial didn't happen. One is that the investigator, who was the only sober thinking person in all this, felt that it was going to alienate all the youth in America if they did it. And secondly, it was a big waste of time and money because they already had the ability to get Lennon thrown out of the country.
In the late 60s, there was a headhunting cop who was not very high up in the drug department in London, which was pretty new anyway. They had 2 dogs for the whole department. And he went round and bust every pop star he could get his hands on, and he got famous. And some of the pop stars had dope in the house, and some of them didn't. It didn't matter to him. He planted it or did whatever. Later on, that's what he did to me, because at that time I didn't have any drugs.
We had no idea that it would come back to haunt us in a very big way, too.
I was convicted of possession in England and fined £100. I mean, £100.
Is this an obstacle?
I was told to plead guilty rather than get into trouble.
Is that the obstacle to your staying here?
Yeah.
His problem seems to be the marijuana conviction. And while that stands, there's no form of relief that's possible in his case.
If he had 4 speeding tickets, or if he had, I make up all the offenses he could have done were he an American citizen, they would have tried to find a way. His vulnerable spot, his Achilles heel. And that's what that was. All it was it gave John Mitchell and that crowd an opening through which to attack him.
John, why are you being deported?
Well, the sort of official reason is something about that I was busted in England for pot. And the real reason is because I'm a peacenik.
You don't think there's any possibility that the government is trying to harass the Lennons?
Absolutely not. This is the kind of treatment we would dish out to anybody convicted of a narcotics offense.
A lawyer's name is Leon Wilds, and he's not a radical lawyer, he's not a William Kunstler, nothing like that. We went to an immigration lawyer who knew about immigration, and he has really been surprised, because he worked in immigration 15 years, he's really been surprised by some of the things that have gone on.
I took the case because it was a challenge. First of all, because I was impressed with these extraordinary people. And second, because these were issues which had never been previously ruled on in their present form in American courts.
You say you've been in trouble all your life. Why is that?
I'm just one of those faces, people never like my face.
Oh, is that what?
Teachers used to get furious about it.
Is it because you're anti-establishment?
I guess it must show on the face,
My original comment to them about the case was that I thought it was a loser. Why? Because most of my clients end up in a deportation proceeding, and if they lose, that's the end of it. If they appeal that decision, they go to the Board of Immigration Appeals, and that is hardly ever successful.
Once more, it started out in fun and games. Getting high, getting stoned, becoming an abnormality from what at that time was considered normal. Now, because society has become so perverted in its abnormalities, somebody such as myself or Donald Trump comes along, and suddenly, all of a sudden, because society has been so calloused to all this wild, outlandish behavior, coloring your hair 15 different colors, and all these body tattoos, and all these body piercings and all these different fads and all these different cultures, now all of a sudden somebody like me is considered to be abnormal. But at one time, this lifestyle, and this is the beginning phases of those seeds that was planted in the 70s, that has turned this country upside down to the point of where we are right now. So the old cliche, one bad apple can spoil the whole bunch, has turned out to be ever so true now, hasn't it? Ever so true.
Leon, he was always kind of suggesting hopelessly that maybe you guys should be a little bit gentler or something.
We announced the birth of a conceptual country, Newtopia. Citizenship of the country can be obtained by declaration of your awareness of Newtopia. Newtopia has no land, no boundaries, no passports, only people. Newtopia has no laws other than cosmic. All people of Newtopia are ambassadors of the country. As two ambassadors of Newtopia, we ask for diplomatic immunity and recognition in the United Nations for our country and its people. Newtopian Embassy, 1 White Street, New York, New York.
Yoko apologized to me afterwards and said, you have to understand, when you represent artists, we're not always predictable. I said, maybe not always predictable, but always enjoyable.
What does the flag mean? What does the flag mean?
Surrender and submission.
It became clear to me that he was a guy of major principle. And he understood that what was being done to him was wrong. It was an abuse of the law, and he was willing to stand up and try to show it, to shine the big light on it.
They're even sort of changing their own rules to get us, you know, just because we're peaceniks, really.
Do you think you're exposed to your anti-war action and not your marijuana conviction, Ed?
Well, I mean, let's say that a few friends of ours in the pop business have exactly the same conviction as me and are allowed to come and go as free as they like. They just don't happen to have the same point of view as me, or they don't state it.
Will you now stop speaking out against the war because of
No, nothing will stop me, and whether I'm here or wherever I may be, I'll always have the same feelings and say what I feel, you know.
Before it goes on, I just want to say that there's lots of things that gives the imagery of being good. Because there's nothing wrong with having hopes of a utopia or peace, as long as it's real utopia and real peace. But keep in mind, Martin Luther King Jr. was not preaching a message of popularity during the time of his assassin's bullet, but was preaching a message of God, of the Holy Scriptures pertaining to that peace or that utopia. Two different platforms. Two different entities. The entity that this guy was proclaiming or standing upon was the entity of drugs, rock and roll, beads, bell bottoms, nice music, good beer, and all the sex that you wanted. The message of my peace and utopia had already been pre-selected and designed and prophesied over 2,000 years ago pertaining to John the Revelator on the island of Patmos, as well as other scriptures that verifies that there will be an outpouring of God's Holy Spirit in the last days towards bringing forth a revolution involving a revival, a real spiritual, anointed revival, not something that is conjured up through microdot or purple maze.
loved him for who he was and who he was to become during that period. And he marched with us, he walked with us. He went up against this powerful government that was terribly wrong, that had misled us into a deeply immoral war. He did not back.
Now that I agree with, pertaining to the Vietnam War. That it was manufactured by various politicians that decided that this is what we needed to do. The things that are occurring now are not being manufactured by the American politicians. They are being manufactured, but not by our people. And now we're seeing the enemy that's breathing down all of our throats towards not only affecting our lives, but affecting our children and our children's children and possibly even their children. So yes, we are in the state of a natural national crisis.
Down.
It's crazy you came in the rain, and I read somewhere that the war movement was over. We're here to bring the boys home, but let's not forget the machines. Bring the machines home, and then we really get somewhere. The people are the only people that can do it.
It wasn't so much that Lenin was being critical of U.S. policy. It's that he was over here enjoying all the benefits of the success that we were giving him, the wealth, all the rest of it, and bad-mouthing us here. Our attitude was, you want to do that? Go back to London, go back to Liverpool.
I like to be here because this is where the music came from. This is what influenced my whole life and got me where I am today, as it were. And I love the place. I'd like to be here. I've got a lot of friends here.
Mm-hmm.
And this is where I want to be, you know. Statue of Liberty, welcome. I even brought my own cash.
He was under an order to leave the country within 60 days for pretty much all of 1972 and on into 1973.
Our reaction to the government's action taken last week, I believe, has been very, very succinctly put by the Wall Street Journal in an editorial of March 28, 1973. It states, "We find it more than a little hard to believe that authorities could find no legal way to resolve what is, after all, a highly unusual set of circumstances. Further, we submit, if the law does not reflect the human equities, it is a law that needs to be changed."
Yes, the case was very difficult at that point, and what he did was to just keep on extending our stay, which I thought was very wise, a very wise tactic.
I don't understand law, as it were, because it is finite, you know, and I don't really go I can't express it and dig that scene, you know. I don't know, you know, it seems just like me, as somebody once said, Kafka-esque. It's just bureaucracy, and they get going, and then what can they do, you know? They don't know where to turn, I suppose. The game started, and we have to play it out.
When I talked to Jerry Rubin and Abby Hoffman about this period, they told me they wanted to try something new, something they thought would maybe be more effective in stopping the war. Jerry Rubin was talking about what he called a political Woodstock that they would hold outside the Republican National Convention.
They really tried to make us go to Miami. And we kept saying we're not going to do it. But Jerry, for political reasons, just announced that we're going to be there.
They think we're going to San Diego or Miami, whatever it is. We've never said we're going. We ain't going. There'll be no big jam with us and Dylan because there's too much going on. We never said we were going. That's it.
By then, John and I realized that it would have been very, very dangerous for us. We had a very distinct, clear feeling that if we had gone to the Republican convention, we would have been in danger of our lives.
How can I go forward when I
he said, the only thing I ever really wanted to do in my life was to play in a rock and roll band. And then he said, I can't let them take that away from me. The very core of his existence was threatened by what they were trying to do to him.
It is now clear that Richard Nixon is the winner of this election. That's what our trend now indicates. The president re-elected by a landslide.
Here we go again. Here we go again, again. Wondering how it all began. Wondering will it ever end.
The fact that McGovern lost, the fact that Nixon was re-elected again, and all that really upset us because in the big picture, the United States, the policy of the United States would affect the whole world. And from that big picture, we were very depressed.
Once Nixon is reelected, the FBI loses interest in Lennon, says, we're closing our file. The Immigration Service, though, is a good bureaucracy. When they're given a job, they do their job. And they kept doing their job. They kept doing it to Lennon for another year and a half, 2 years.
The situation is I'm still appealing. Like every now and then they'll say, you've got 30 days to get out, and then my lawyer will appeal and we'll go up to another court or something like that, and it'll just go on forever. Terry Sutton put it well. He says, it keeps the Conservatives happy that they're doing something about me and what I represent. And it keeps the Liberals happy because I haven't actually been thrown out. So everybody's happy, you know?
The easy thing to do would have been just slink away and go back to England. But he chose to stand on his rights, and I'm glad that he did.
Lennon and his legal team went on the offensive and filed a couple of very interesting lawsuits.
I sued the Attorney General, Mitchell, and a whole slew of other people who I claimed were involved in a conspiracy to deny John and Yoko's case and get them out of the United States improperly.
What do you think your chances are of remaining in this country?
99 to 1.
4 or against?
4.
Why is that?
Because I'm overconfident as usual.
We ultimately were able to examine the records in the case. And lo and behold, deep in John's immigration file, which was a high security file, were documents reaching all the way up to President Nixon, showing improper interference in an immigration case and prejudgment.
Probably the most important documents in the Lennon FBI file are reports addressed to the White House, signed by J. Edgar Hoover. Now, these were not sent directly to Richard Nixon. They're addressed to H.R. Haldeman, assistant to the president. Now, Haldeman was the most important person in the White House if you wanted to get to Nixon. So when Hoover sends something to Haldeman saying, here's our report on our progress in trying to kick Lennon out of the country, the reason that he's doing that is that Nixon wants to know.
I would not say that it was integral to the politics of the Nixon administration to keep John Lennon from having residence in this country. I think it was of a piece with the general nastiness of the Nixon administration.
I'm sick and tired of hearing things from uptight, short-sighted, narrow-minded hypocrites. All I want is the truth. Just give me some truth.
I had no prior knowledge of the Watergate break-in. You had the President of the United States, Richard Nixon, who was running a rogue presidency. a criminal presidency.
We do know from Mr. Nixon's long statement of May the 22nd that he did approve, much earlier, a program of wiretapping and even burglary in national security matters.
Did other presidents break the law, bend the law occasionally? I'm sure they did. Was there wholesale criminality in any other presidency in our history? No.
For God's sakes, they committed a burglary and then they destroyed the government of the United States covering it up. That is the context in which you have to determine and judge and value what they did to John Lennon.
The case against John Lennon by the FBI and the Immigration and Naturalization Service and by President Nixon and all his people was that John Lennon was disloyal to the United States of America and what it stood for. The real disloyalty was Nixon's, Hoover's, the INS, and all the people who were implicated in the FBI and the INS and wherever else, because their perversion, distortion of the Constitution, their violation of the basic principles, that was the greatest disloyalty to this country.
Therefore, I shall resign the presidency effective at noon tomorrow. Vice President Ford will be sworn in as president at that hour in this office.
The question still remains. Is what this individual just said true? Or was it the other way around? That somebody knew something about these influences that was coming over here to America, and they was actually trying to protect the American citizens from this type of sabotage that had occurred. You see, in 1972, I remember farming as being, I don't know, 1972, I guess I was about 11, 12 years old during these occurrences. I remember us having to weld these flaps on combines to be able to combine that year because it was such of a wet year. I remember it being cold and nasty, but also remember that this was the hype of not only the Nixon era, but this was the hype of the hippie era. And once more, we can look back today and see the damages of the seeds that was sown back then